I want to move on a little bit, um, and kind of get your perspective on your thoughts with respect to what's happening right now with psychedelics and the mainstreaming process. Um, in the book, or well, I think it wasn't in the book, it was in our prep emails. You expressed that one of the topics you'd like to talk about was, quote, using psychedelics as a band aid to keep a flawed system running. And this is something I'm concerned about as well. I'm not the only one. A podcast that I follow called Conspirituality recently, or I guess several months ago, did an interview with a couple of authors from Symposia who generally I have a love-hate relationship with their reporting because I love some of the things that they do, and other
Oh,
times I think they can be a little rabid in their attacks and a little
yeah.
unthoughtful. Um, but this particular paper, this
And
particular
twisting the
podcast,
truth.
well, yeah.
Yep. Sorry, go on.
Anyway, so this particular interview I thought was quite good. And it was about their paper Beyond the Psychedelic Hype, exploring the persistence of neoliberal paradigm, which was exploring how attempting to integrate psychedelics as medicine in a paradigm that puts health and mental health onus on the individual and not on society in which the individual lives risks these compounds becoming something to help people come back to enough wellness to go back to working within and for a system that harmed them in the first place. Um,
Yeah.
Recently, I was also interviewed for a course run by Althea Herbal called the Belonging Course, and he asked me something about this too, and I wrote in advance, and at some point I'll get off my soapbox and hear your perspective on this. Um, this is what I wrote.
No, it's good soapbox.
Thank you. Uh, there is a concern that psilocybin mushrooms will, like many other things before them, just get churned up by the capitalist machine and fed like a slurry balm to ease the pain of a dysfunctional society in solely medical contexts that are so well controlled that any individual receiving psilocybin never has to feel like it was society that was the problem, so we can all have our temporary relief and go back to our consumer pod cogs in the pillage engine burning up life on this planet for the padded pockets of psychopaths. Um, Now, that's not to say I don't
Here, here.
support. That's not to say I don't support psychedelic medicine or psychedelic therapy or anything, but just this general concern, or that the underground way of doing it is the only way to do it, but this general concern that things are, gonna that before psychedelics can have a positive effect on the world as it is going to have a toxic effect on psychedelics. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a two-way street, you know? Like, I totally understand where you're coming from. Like, it's the classic idea is the MDMA therapy for PTSD war veterans. But then it's going to be like, well, then that means you can just keep having wars. And now we can treat the people who are the casualties, you know? And you're seeing this with the microdosing, you know? It's like microdosing is helping me achieve more in my job and I can make more money because I'm so clear-headed. And so you're like, ugh, yuck, this is fucked. Um, so it's just like, okay, what does this look like then? Like, and towards the end of my facilitation thing where I was just like, am I even helping? Like sometimes the same people are coming back every couple months. They're like, oh, I'm depressed again because I'm still stuck in the fucking job I hate and I'm living in this shitty apartment that I hate and I'm like, fuck, am I just enabling this person to basically endure their hellish existence enough to be another cog in the machine? That's obviously I don't want to demean their healing process, but not naming any names, but it was just a trend I noticed, So this sort of comes back to my original what I was talking about before, was like, okay, how do we use psychedelics to change culture in a way that doesn't like turn it into a fucking weird cult? And like, what's the bigger picture? Like, and I haven't really worked that out. I think it would be like, I think it's actually more for the plants to say, really, like for the land and for the country and for spirit to sort of speak of than any self-directed, egoic human planning control idea, And I think this links into this over psychologization of like seeing these medicines as tools, And I'm like, I mean, you know, I'm a fucking dirty hippie. I'm like, they're spirits, in my opinion. They're these sort of plant intelligences that have a greater situated like place in the sort of Gaian, you know, intelligence of which we've fallen out of balance with. So I think this is the next task for all of us ahead is like, okay, how do we actually work with these medicines in a responsible way that changes culture for the better? Um, so far, all I can really think of is like, you know, I've got a few ideas, and that's like basically educating people so they can begin to some degree um, forming like small self-sufficient, well, maybe not self-sufficient, but like self-healing groups, you know, where it becomes this more organic process where they don't have to rely on the you know, the psychologists or even the facilitators, really. You know, obviously there's a lot of problems and pitfalls in that, but you know, I'm just sort of spitballing shit at the moment in my head. And then the other parts would be like, yeah, where it would be potentially used in like more intentional community containers where you can start experimenting with like different ways of being and living and raising children in ways that don't fuck them up from the get go, um, and where it's woven in to the fabric of that larger, um, you know, social fabric. You know, where it is. You know, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. It's still very rudimentary, and you know, but yeah, I'm not really sure. And part of me wonders if I'm even meant to know. You know, is it more sort of more about alignment than trying to like design and devise, which is a very like dominator kind of way of doing things. Maybe it's more about allowing it to come through us instead of forcing our preconceived ideas of what it should look like and what it's going to look like. You know, because I think we're living through the end stages of that way of being. Yeah.
And maybe that's our role, is to live through the end stages of this, and let successive generations pick up the mantle of actually figuring it out. Not to say that we don't do anything, but what we do is trying to navigate and be honest and forthright, and owning the poverty, like the cultural, spiritual poverty of our era,
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
expecting abundance to be on the other side of it for us personally.
No. Well, I mean, I had this big Iboga trip where, um, and my intention was like, oh, to heal my, you know, self, whatever, some selfish fucking shit. And then instead I got this big download about like, you guys, this healing that you're going for, it's going to take several generations to get back to any level of like wellness, if you want to call it that. Like, because like we've been imprinted so deeply from the get-go with these sort of out of balance ways, you know, that you know, well, the best you can do is just clear as much junk as you can from your own shit, try not to pass that on to the next generation, and then they start from that point and they try and clear all that, and hopefully they're living in some kind of you know, living situation, some kind of community or society that supports that um that process, you know, on a deeper level. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, the comment you made around like learning how to raise our kids differently. I've had on the show a handful of times now a woman named Darshan Narvaez, and her work is what she calls the evolved nest. I have the book nearby.
Oh, I've actually, yeah, I was listening to her talk about the evolved nest. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I've had her
No,
on
that
the
makes
show
a
a
lot of
handful of
sense.
times, and her work is really incredible, to talk about the cycle between like the culture adults live in and the culture of child rearing, and how the culture of child rearing generates the culture adults live in, which generates the culture of child rearing, and that the consequence of
Yeah,
where we're
yeah.
at now is that we're in a cycle of competitive detachment rather than a cycle of
Ah,
peaceful cooperation that allows for human flourishing, which requires us to sort of revamp the nest we raise our children within, which results in and
yeah.
is generated by changing the culture that adults live in. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a great episode. Again, I'll leave a little card out for people who want to listen to it.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I totally agree. I mean, the reason why, you know, back to the first thing we're talking about, the self-centeredness in our culture, is because of how we were raised as children. You know, it's just a sort of self-propelling cycle. And if you grow up in a tribal situation, and I've been to a few communities where kids are raised in a more communal setting, they're just a lot more balanced. They've got multiple guardians in a way. Everyone's pulling them into line. They're getting love and attachment from not just two people who are heavily overworked all the time. So, I would totally see how that would just from the get go, just not half the problems that we have just wouldn't even be there. Well, half is an
Hmm.
estimation, but definitely
Many.
it's
Yeah.
a big one.